the woman lying unconscious in the hospital bed, had saved his life twice. But he didn't know it. Instead, he was preparing to marry the woman who had just tried to kill her. As doctors fought to keep the maid alive, billionaire Ethan Black sat in another room signing papers that would transfer millions of dollars to his fiancée, the woman he believed had rescued him from drowning when he was 14 years old. What Ethan didn't know was that everything he believed was a lie. The woman he was about to marry had never saved him. She had never met him. And the real girl, the one who pulled him from a swimming pool 20 years ago, the same woman who later risked her life to save him from a horrific car crash, had been living under his roof for months, cleaning his floors, serving his meals, and suffering in silence while another woman stole the life that should have been hers. But fate had left behind one clue. A small mark. A mark that would expose a decades-old deception, destroy a lifelong friendship, and stop Ethan from making the biggest mistake of his life. Because in less than 72 hours, he was about to lose everything to the wrong woman. Before we uncover how one lie nearly destroyed 3 lives, take a second to subscribe if you love emotional stories filled with shocking twists, betrayal, and unforgettable endings. And tell me in the comments, if someone saved your life, how far would you go to repay them? Now, let's go back to where this unbelievable story began. Long before he became one of the youngest billionaires in America. Before luxury cars, private jets, or a mansion that stretched farther than the eye could see. He was just a frightened 14-year-old boy. And on one summer afternoon, he died. Or at least, everyone watching thought he had. It was supposed to be a celebration. His father had invited influential businessmen and their families to a lavish pool party at their estate. Laughter echoed through the gardens. Champagne glasses clinked. Children ran freely around the enormous swimming pool, while their parents talked about money and business. Among all those wealthy guests, there was one person who clearly didn't belong. A 12-year-old girl. She wasn't invited. She was the daughter of the family's struggling next-door neighbors. Her mother had come over to help clean after the party in exchange for a little money. With nowhere else to leave her daughter, she brought the young girl along. The expensive dresses, the designer shoes, the glamorous lifestyle. They were things the little girl had only ever seen from behind her bedroom window. She stayed quiet, keeping to herself, trying not to attract attention. Some of the wealthy children mocked her faded clothes. Others laughed because her shoes were worn out. She simply smiled, pretending it didn't hurt. Meanwhile, the birthday boy slipped away from the crowd. Restless, curious, determined to prove he wasn't afraid. He climbed onto the highest diving platform, overlooking the massive pool. The adults were too busy talking. No one noticed. The children were too distracted. No one warned him. He looked down. His heart pounded. Then, he jumped. At first, everyone clapped, until they realized he never came back up. The water became terrifyingly still. 1 second, 5 seconds, 10 seconds. Panic spread across the poolside. Someone screamed. Another guest jumped to their feet. His mother dropped the glass she was holding. His father froze in disbelief. No one moved. No one knew what to do. Except one frightened little girl, who couldn't even swim very well herself. Without thinking about the danger, she kicked off her worn-out shoes, closed her eyes, and leaped into the deep water. That single decision would change 2 lives forever. The moment the little girl disappeared beneath the water. The entire party fell silent. Some guests covered their mouths. Others turned away, unable to watch. "Someone do something," Ethan's mother screamed, her voice breaking. But panic had frozen everyone. The little girl wasn't the strongest swimmer. In fact, she had only learned a few months earlier in the neighborhood creek near her tiny home. She wasn't supposed to survive this. Yet somehow, she reached the bottom of the pool. Through the cloudy blue water, she spotted the boy. His eyes were closed. His body was sinking deeper. She grabbed his wrist. Pulled. Nothing. He was too heavy. She tried again. Her tiny arms trembled from exhaustion. Her lungs burned. Every second underwater felt like forever. For a terrifying moment, she almost let go. Then she remembered something her late father had once told her. Courage isn't being stronger than everyone else, it's refusing to leave someone behind. Tears filled her eyes. She wrapped both arms around Ethan, pushed with everything she had, and kicked toward the surface. Suddenly, a hand reached into the water. One of the security guards had finally jumped in. Together, they dragged Ethan onto the pool deck. He wasn't breathing. His skin had turned pale. His mother collapsed beside him, crying uncontrollably. A guest immediately began CPR. 1 compression. 2. 3. Nothing. The silence became unbearable. Then, water burst from Ethan's mouth. He coughed violently. The sound echoed through the entire estate. A wave of relief swept over everyone. His mother hugged him so tightly, she refused to let go. His father thanked the doctors who had rushed over. Guests applauded. The security guards were praised for their bravery. Everyone had someone to celebrate. Except the little girl. She sat quietly at the edge of the pool, shivering, her knees scraped, her elbows bruised. Her soaked dress clung to her small frame. No one noticed. Not a single person. As she slowly stood, her torn dress caught on a broken tile near the pool. It ripped just enough to reveal a small, crescent-shaped birthmark high on her left thigh. The frightened boy, still coughing in his mother's arms, looked up. For only a second, his eyes met hers, and that tiny mark burned itself into his memory. Before he could say a single word, the girl quickly covered the tear in her dress. Embarrassed, she lowered her head and walked away. She believed no one had seen it, but Ethan had. Moments later, his wealthy father reached into his pocket, pulled out a thick envelope of cash, and walked toward the girl's mother. "This should cover everything," he said. The girl's mother hesitated. "We didn't save your son for money." But Ethan's father insisted. "It's the least I can do." The woman finally accepted, not because she wanted the money, but because her family desperately needed it. As they prepared to leave, the little girl glanced back one last time. Their eyes met again. She smiled, a small, gentle, almost unforgettable smile. Then she disappeared beyond the estate gates. Neither of them knew it would be the last time they would see each other. For 20 long years. 20 years passed. The frightened 14-year-old boy who almost drowned was gone. In his place stood Ethan Black, 34 years old, the youngest CEO of the Black Group, a billionaire whose name appeared on magazine covers, business journals, and television interviews. People admired his success. They envied his fortune. But there was one thing money had never been able to buy: answers. Over the years, Ethan never forgot the little girl who had pulled him from the bottom of that swimming pool. He couldn't remember her name. He didn't know where she lived anymore. All he remembered was her smile and the tiny crescent-shaped birthmark on her left thigh. As he grew older, he quietly hired private investigators. He donated to charities in the neighborhood where he had grown up. He revisited the old estate more times than he could count. But every search ended the same way. Nothing. It was as though the little girl had simply vanished. Sometimes late at night, he would stare out of his office window and whisper to himself, "If you're still out there, I just want to thank you." Meanwhile, life had taken a very different path for the girl who had saved him. Her name was Claire. She was now 32 years old. Life had never been kind to her. After losing both of her parents within a few years of each other, she was left with nothing. No inheritance, no family fortune, only a tiny rented apartment, a stack of unpaid bills, and an old photograph of her parents that she refused to throw away. She worked wherever she could. Restaurants, hotels, cleaning offices after midnight. Anything that would keep food on the table. Yet despite everything life had stolen from her, she never stopped helping people. Neighbors knew her as the woman who would share her last meal with someone hungrier than herself. She believed kindness always found its way back, even if it took years. She had completely forgotten the wealthy boy she once saved. To her, it had simply been the right thing to do. Two people, living completely different lives. One searching, the other never realizing she was being searched for. Fate had kept them apart for 20 years. But destiny was about to put them on the very same road, on the very same afternoon, at the very same second. Neither of them knew that one ordinary day was about to change everything. Some people say destiny announces itself, with signs, with warnings, with miracles. But on that cold Thursday afternoon, destiny arrived disguised as an ordinary day. 7:48 a.m. Claire stepped out of her tiny apartment carrying a worn-out backpack. Inside were 2 sandwiches she had made herself. One for lunch, the other for an elderly homeless man she passed every morning. She had barely enough money to survive the week. Yet somehow, she always found something to give. Across the city, 7:48 a.m. Ethan Black stepped out of his glass penthouse overlooking the skyline. A chauffeur opened the door of a sleek black luxury sedan. His assistant handed him a schedule. 3 board meetings, a television interview, dinner with foreign investors, a life plan down to the minute. Yet even surrounded by success, his eyes looked tired. Success had filled his bank account, but not the empty space in his heart. By noon, Claire had finished another unsuccessful job interview. "We're looking for someone with more experience." Those words had become painfully familiar. She forced a smile, thanked the manager, and quietly walked away. Meanwhile, Ethan had just completed the biggest business acquisition of his career. Executives applauded. Flash cameras exploded around him. Reporters shouted his name. But all he wanted was to go home. As the afternoon sky darkened, rain began to fall. Not heavily, just enough to turn the streets slick and reflective. Claire tightened her jacket and hurried toward the bus stop. She noticed something unusual. An elderly man standing on the opposite sidewalk struggled to control his wheelchair as one of its front wheels became trapped near the curb. Cars rushed past. No one stopped. Claire looked at the approaching traffic, then back at the old man. Without hesitation, she stepped off the curb. At that exact moment, 3 blocks away, Ethan's driver reached for the ringing phone mounted on the dashboard. Just one glance. Just 1 second. When he looked back, traffic had suddenly stopped. He slammed on the brakes. The tires screamed. The luxury sedan began to skid across the rain-soaked road. Straight toward the intersection. Straight toward Claire. Everything slowed. The old man's terrified eyes. The sound of twisting metal. The deafening blast of a truck horn. Claire looked up. She saw the black sedan spinning completely out of control. She had less than 2 seconds. She could save herself. Or she could save a complete stranger. She never hesitated. She shoved the elderly man and his wheelchair with every ounce of strength she had. The chair rolled clear, but the force threw Claire directly into the path of Ethan's sliding car. The impact echoed through the intersection. Glass exploded into the air. People screamed. The world fell silent. And for the second time in 20 years, the same woman had risked her life to save the same man. Neither of them knew it. Not yet. The entire intersection erupted into chaos. People abandoned their cars. Someone shouted for an ambulance. Another person called the police. The rain continued to fall, as if the sky itself refused to look away. Ethan's luxury sedan finally came to a violent stop against a concrete barrier. The airbags exploded. Smoke drifted from beneath the crumpled hood. Inside, everything was silent. A thin line of blood ran down Ethan's forehead. His ears rang. His vision blurred. For a few terrifying seconds, he couldn't remember where he was. Then, he heard it. Help her. The desperate cry cut through the confusion. Ethan forced his swollen eyes open. Through the cracked windshield, he saw a young woman lying motionless on the wet pavement. The elderly man she had pushed to safety was crawling toward her, tears streaming down his face. "You saved me," he whispered over and over. "You saved me." Something about those words struck Ethan like lightning. Saved me. The words echoed in his mind. His heartbeat quickened. Without waiting for his security team, Ethan kicked open the damaged car door and stumbled into the rain. "Move," he shouted. The crowd parted. Claire lay unconscious. Blood trickled from a cut near her temple. One hand remained tightly clenched, as though she were still trying to protect someone. The paramedics rushed in. One of them carefully cut away part of the fabric around her injured leg to check for fractures. For the briefest moment, Ethan caught sight of a faint, crescent-shaped mark high on her left thigh. His entire body froze. His breathing stopped. No, it couldn't be. His eyes widened. That mark, he had seen it before. Years ago. At a swimming pool. On a frightened little girl who had vanished from his life. His heart pounded so hard it hurt. He took one step toward the ambulance. "Wait," he whispered. "I know her." But before he could get any closer, the ambulance doors slammed shut. Its siren pierced the air, and within seconds, it disappeared into the rain, leaving Ethan standing alone in the middle of the street. Soaked, shaking, unable to decide whether what he had just seen was a memory or a miracle. That night, he couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw 2 images. a little girl disappearing through the gates of his childhood home, and an unconscious stranger disappearing into the back of an ambulance. For the first time in 20 years, those two memories had become one. Somewhere in the city, the woman he had spent half his life searching for was alive, but by sunrise, she would be gone again, and fate would force them to miss each other one more time. For the next 3 months, Ethan became obsessed. Every hospital in the city received a visit. Every accident report was reviewed. Every ambulance record was requested through his legal team. But the answer was always the same. No patient matching that description. It was as though the woman had vanished. Again, sleep became a stranger. Business meetings ended early. His assistants noticed he was distracted. Even the board of directors whispered among themselves. The billionaire who never made mistakes was losing focus. Only one man knew why. His best friend, Daniel Carter. Daniel had known Ethan since they were boys. They had attended the same private schools, built businesses together, celebrated victories side by side. If Ethan trusted anyone in the world, it was Daniel. One evening, the two friends sat alone in Ethan's study. Rain tapped softly against the windows. A half-finished glass of whiskey rested on the table between them. Daniel finally broke the silence. "You're searching for her again, aren't you?" Ethan smiled faintly. "I never stopped." Daniel leaned back. "You've spent 20 years looking for someone whose name you don't even know." Ethan stared into the fireplace. "You don't understand." "No," Daniel replied quietly. "I probably don't." Ethan looked up. "There are only 2 reasons I'm alive today. The first happened when I was 14. The second happened 3 months ago. They were the same person." Daniel frowned. "What makes you so sure?" Ethan closed his eyes. "The birthmark. I saw it. The exact same crescent-shaped mark. For 20 years. I've never forgotten it." Daniel said nothing. Not a single word. But something changed in his expression. Something so brief, no one else would have noticed. Curiosity. Calculation. Opportunity. That night, long after Ethan had gone upstairs, Daniel remained alone in the study. His eyes drifted toward an old wooden box resting on a bookshelf. Inside were faded newspaper clippings, photos from Ethan's childhood, and handwritten notes from every investigator Ethan had ever hired. Daniel slowly opened the box. He read every page, every detail, every memory, including one sentence Ethan had written himself years earlier. "If I ever find the girl who saved my life, half of everything I own would never be enough to repay her." Daniel's breathing slowed. "Half of everything." He quietly closed the notebook, slipped it back into the box, then reached for his phone. He walked onto the balcony, made a call. The voice on the other end answered almost immediately. Daniel smiled. "I think," he said softly, "I've just found us a very profitable opportunity." The person on the other end laughed. Daniel looked back through the window at his best friend's empty chair. His smile disappeared. "Don't worry," he whispered. "He'll believe every word." Inside the mansion, Ethan stood at his bedroom window, looking out into the rain, still wondering if the mysterious woman was alive, completely unaware that the greatest danger in his life was no longer outside his house. It had been sitting beside him all along. The following evening, Daniel arrived at an upscale restaurant on the edge of the city. Not for dinner, for business. He walked through the private entrance, past the crowded dining room, and into a secluded VIP lounge. A young woman was already waiting. Elegant, confident, beautiful enough to command attention the moment she entered any room. Her name was Victoria. She wasn't poor. She wasn't desperate. She simply loved one thing more than anything else: luxury. And she had spent years chasing the fastest path to it. Daniel slid into the chair across from her. Without greeting her, he placed a thick envelope on the table. Victoria raised an eyebrow. What is this? An opportunity. She opened the envelope. Inside, photographs. A faded newspaper clipping about a boy rescued from drowning. Old sketches of a crescent-shaped birthmark. Copies of Ethan's handwritten notes. She looked up. I don't understand. Daniel smiled. You don't have to. You only have to become someone's miracle. Victoria leaned forward. And who exactly am I saving? The richest man you'll ever meet. For a long moment, she stared at him. Then she laughed. You've lost your mind. Daniel calmly pushed another envelope across the table. This one was much heavier. When Victoria opened it, bundles of cash filled the envelope. Her laughter stopped. This, Daniel said quietly, is only the beginning. He explained everything. The drowning, the mysterious little girl, the 20-year search, the accident, the birthmark. Most importantly, he explained Ethan's promise. Half of everything I own would never be enough to repay her. Victoria's eyes widened. You actually believe he'll give someone that much? Daniel didn't hesitate. I know he will. Silence filled the room. Victoria slowly closed the envelope. What if he asks questions? He will. What if he remembers something I do? I'll handle that. What if the real woman appears? Daniel's expression darkened. She won't. The certainty in his voice sent a chill through the room. Victoria studied him carefully. You're betraying your best friend. Daniel looked away. For some people, he murmured, money changes everything. Victoria extended her hand. So, we have a deal. Daniel looked at her hand for several seconds, then shook it. The deal was sealed. A friendship built over 20 years had just been sold for a fortune. Meanwhile, across the city, Claire sat alone inside her apartment. A final notice from her landlord rested on the kitchen table. 3 months of unpaid rent. If she couldn't find steady work by the end of the week, she would lose the only home she had left. She folded the notice, placed it inside a drawer, and whispered to herself, there has to be a way. At that exact moment, Daniel's phone buzzed. A message from one of Ethan's household managers. We're looking for a new live-in maid immediately. Daniel read the message, then smiled. Not because he intended to help Claire, but because he had no idea. Fate had just made its own move. While he was busy creating the perfect lie, destiny was quietly guiding the real truth, straight toward Ethan's front door. The next morning, Claire woke before sunrise. She looked around her tiny apartment one last time. Most of her belongings had already been packed into 2 worn-out boxes. The landlord had been patient, but patience didn't pay rent. She folded the blanket she had slept under, picked up her backpack, and whispered softly, Please just let today be different. Across the city, inside the Black estate, the head housekeeper, Mrs. Eleanor Brooks, frowned as she looked over a stack of applications. One by one, she pushed them aside. They all have experience, she sighed. But none of them have heart. Just then, the front gate buzzer rang. Claire stood outside. Her clothes were simple. Her shoes had been repaired more times than she could remember. She clutched a neatly folded application in trembling hands. The security guard glanced at her. "You here for the maid position?" Claire nodded politely. "If it's already filled." "I understand." Something about her quiet humility caught his attention. "Wait here." A few minutes later, Mrs. Brooks stepped outside. She didn't ask Claire where she had worked. She didn't ask how much experience she had. Instead, she asked one unexpected question. If no one ever thanked you for your work, would you still do it well? Claire smiled. "My parents used to tell me, your character should never depend on who's watching." Mrs. Brooks said nothing. She simply turned around. "Come with me." Inside the mansion, Claire couldn't help staring. Crystal chandeliers, marble staircases, paintings worth more than she could earn in a lifetime. It felt like walking into another world. What she didn't know was that 20 years earlier, she had stood inside this very same house as a frightened little girl. Meanwhile, on the second floor, Ethan walked toward the grand staircase while speaking on the phone. "No," he said firmly. "Cancel the afternoon meetings. I'm reviewing the accident reports myself." Claire followed Mrs. Brooks through the entrance hall below. Their paths were separated by only a few feet. Ethan descended one side of the staircase. Claire crossed beneath the other. A massive marble column stood between them. One step more, and they would have seen each other. But at that exact moment, Mrs. Brooks called Claire's name. Claire turned. Ethan continued walking. They passed each other, without ever knowing it. The audience could almost feel fate holding its breath. Mrs. Brooks led Claire into the staff quarters. "We'll give you a 1-week trial. If you work hard, the job is yours." Claire's eyes filled with grateful tears. "Thank you. You have no idea what this means to me." Mrs. Brooks smiled warmly. "I think I do." Later that evening, Claire was assigned her first task: prepare the West Wing. The only problem: the West Wing belonged to Ethan Black. As Claire gathered her cleaning supplies, Daniel arrived unexpectedly at the mansion. He greeted the staff with his usual charming smile. Then his eyes drifted across the hallway and landed on Claire. He had never seen her before, but something about her face made him pause, only for a second. Then he walked away. He didn't know why she unsettled him. He only knew. His instincts rarely lied. And for the first time since beginning his plan, Daniel felt something he hadn't expected: fear. Claire's first morning at Black Estate began before dawn. The mansion was still asleep. The only sounds were the ticking of an antique grandfather clock and the soft footsteps of the household staff. Mrs. Brooks handed Claire a small notebook. "These are Mr. Black's rules." Claire read them carefully. Never interrupt a meeting. Never enter his office without permission. Never touch the old wooden memory box on the bookshelf. Claire nodded. "I understand." Mrs. Brooks smiled. "Most people come here for the salary. I'm hoping you came for something more." Claire looked around the mansion. "I came for a second chance." Meanwhile, Across town, Daniel was putting the final pieces of his plan into place. He invited Ethan to lunch at an exclusive members-only club. "No business today," Daniel insisted. "You've been working too hard." Reluctantly, Ethan agreed. When they arrived, the restaurant seemed almost empty. At least, that's what Ethan believed, because Daniel had quietly reserved the entire dining room. Everything had been rehearsed. Every minute, every movement, every word. Victoria entered exactly 7 minutes later. She wasn't overdressed. She wasn't trying too hard. She looked natural. As she passed Ethan's table, a leather notebook slipped from her hands. Pages scattered across the polished floor. Ethan immediately stood to help. "I'm so sorry," Victoria said with an embarrassed smile. "It's my fault." As they gathered the papers together, one old newspaper clipping slid from the notebook. The headline caught Ethan's eye. "Local boy, survives pool tragedy." His hands froze. His pulse quickened. He looked at Victoria. "You kept this?" Victoria hesitated, just long enough, then lowered her eyes. "I've carried it for years." Ethan felt the room disappear around him. Daniel remained silent, watching, waiting. Victoria slowly reached for the clipping. "I guess it's time someone finally knew the truth." Ethan's voice almost failed him. "What truth?" She looked at him, not dramatically, not tearfully, almost reluctantly. "I was 12 years old. I lived next door to your family. I never expected we'd meet again." The word struck Ethan like thunder. For 20 years, he had imagined this exact conversation. Hundreds of times, thousands perhaps. His heart wanted to believe her. His mind begged him to ask more questions. But before he could, Victoria quietly stood. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said anything. I've lived my own life. You don't owe me anything." She turned to leave, exactly as Daniel had instructed. People always chase what walks away. "Ethan," Daniel finally spoke, "go after her." For several seconds, Ethan couldn't move. Then, he ran. Back at Black Estate, Claire entered Ethan's private study for the very first time. Sunlight poured through the tall windows. The room felt untouched, personal. As she dusted the bookshelves, her eyes paused on an old framed photograph. A smiling 14-year-old boy, standing beside a swimming pool. Claire smiled to herself. "He looks familiar," she whispered, but the memory never came. She gently placed the frame back exactly where it belonged, unaware that the boy in the photograph was now running through the streets, chasing the wrong woman, and only a few feet away, resting quietly on the bookshelf, was the wooden memory box, the one object that held the truth everyone was desperately searching for. Ethan caught up with Victoria just before she reached the parking lot. "Please." His voice was almost pleading. "Don't leave." Victoria stopped, but she didn't turn around immediately, exactly as Daniel had coached her. When she finally faced Ethan, there were tears in her eyes. Not loud, not dramatic, just enough to seem real. "I never wanted you to know who I was," she whispered. "I saved a little boy, not a billionaire." Ethan lowered his head. "You waited 20 years, and I never even thanked you." Victoria forced a faint smile. "You don't owe me anything." Those 6 words shattered the last wall around Ethan's heart. For years, he had imagined meeting his rescuer. He expected anger, questions, bitterness. Instead, he found grace. At least, that's what he believed. From inside the restaurant, Daniel watched through the glass. Everything was unfolding exactly as planned. Back at Black Estate, Claire spent the afternoon cleaning Ethan's private library. As she carefully arranged the shelves, she noticed one of the oldest books had a torn spine. Instead of throwing it away, she repaired it by hand, using simple materials from the staff room. Mrs. Brooks watched quietly from the doorway. "You didn't have to do that." Claire smiled. "My father used to say, if something has carried memories for years, it deserves someone willing to protect it." Mrs. Brooks said nothing, but something about those words stayed with her. That evening, Ethan finally returned home. For the first time in months, there was a hint of peace on his face. As he entered his study, he immediately noticed something unusual. The old bookshelves looked different. Not newer, just loved. His eyes settled on the repaired book. He gently picked it up, running his fingers across the carefully restored binding. He called for Mrs. Brooks. "Who fixed this?" "The new maid, sir." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "Tell her." "Thank you." Mrs. Brooks smiled. "I will." It was only 2 simple words, but no employer had thanked Claire for anything in years. When Mrs. Brooks passed along the message, Claire's eyes lit up. He noticed. Mrs. Brooks laughed softly. He notices more than people think. Later that night, Ethan stood alone in his study. He opened the wooden memory box once again. Inside, the old newspaper clipping, the faded photograph, the handwritten promise. Half of everything I own would never be enough. He quietly closed the lid. Tomorrow, he would introduce Victoria to the estate. He wanted everyone to meet the woman who had changed his life. Outside the study, Claire carried a tray of fresh coffee toward Mrs. Brooks. As she passed the closed door, she paused. Something inside the room felt strangely familiar. Not the furniture, not the walls, the feeling. A memory brushed against the edge of her mind. Like a dream she couldn't quite remember. She stood there for only a moment, then quietly walked away. Behind the closed door, Ethan smiled for the first time in years, believing fate had finally rewarded him. Outside the same door, the real woman who had saved him walked silently into the darkness, still carrying a tray, still carrying a secret. And neither of them realized that destiny had already placed them under the same roof. One was about to receive everything she had never earned. The other didn't yet know. She was about to lose everything she deserved. 3 days later, Black Estate looked different. Fresh flowers filled the entrance hall. The dining room had been prepared for a private dinner. Every member of the household knew one thing. Mr. Black was bringing home a special guest. Mrs. Brooks gathered the staff. "Tonight has to be perfect." Claire quietly nodded. She spent the afternoon arranging the dining table by hand. Every glass aligned perfectly. Every candle placed with care. Every flower trimmed until it looked just right. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She simply believed if something was worth doing, it was worth doing well. Just before sunset, a black luxury car rolled through the mansion gates. Ethan stepped out first. For the first time in years, He looked genuinely happy. Then, Victoria emerged from the passenger seat. Elegant, graceful, confident. The staff welcomed her warmly. Claire remained in the background, carrying a silver tray. Their eyes met for the very first time. Victoria smiled politely. Claire smiled back. Neither woman spoke, but something inside Victoria shifted. She couldn't explain it. There was something about the young maid, something strangely unsettling. Inside the dining room, conversation flowed easily. Ethan laughed. Daniel laughed. Victoria laughed. From a distance, they looked like lifelong friends. Claire quietly refilled their glasses whenever needed, almost invisible, until one unexpected moment. As she reached across the table, the sleeve of her uniform caught on a decorative candle holder. The tray tilted. Crystal glasses slipped. Ethan instinctively stood. Before anyone else could react, Claire caught every single glass, without allowing one to fall. Silence. Even Daniel looked impressed. Claire lowered her head. "I'm so sorry. There was no damage, sir." Ethan smiled. "You just saved a set of glasses worth more than my first car." The room burst into laughter. Claire laughed too. Softly, naturally, for reasons he couldn't explain. The sound stopped Ethan's heart for just a second. It wasn't the laugh itself. It was the feeling. A feeling he hadn't experienced since childhood. Warm, safe, familiar. He watched Claire leave the room. Without realizing, he was still smiling. Victoria noticed. "So," she asked playfully, "does your maid always make you smile like that?" Ethan blinked. "What?" Victoria forced a laugh. "I'm joking." Everyone laughed. Everyone, except Daniel. His eyes followed Claire until she disappeared into the kitchen. That strange feeling returned. He had ignored it once. He refused to ignore it again. Later that night, after Victoria had gone home, Daniel quietly approached Ethan's study. The door was slightly open. Inside, Ethan sat alone, holding the old newspaper clipping. "I finally found her," he whispered to himself. "I finally found the girl who saved my life." Daniel smiled. His plan was working. Until his eyes drifted across the hallway. Claire was cleaning the antique mirror outside the study. As she polished the glass, Daniel noticed something. The reflection. For a brief second, the mirror placed Ethan's face beside Claire's. Neither of them saw it, but Daniel did. And something about the image disturbed him. Not because they were standing together, but because, for the first time, they looked like they belonged together. Daniel immediately looked away. "No," he muttered under his breath. "That can never happen." Inside the study, Ethan carefully placed the newspaper clipping back into the wooden memory box. Outside, Claire quietly switched off the hallway lights before heading to her room. They were separated by nothing more than a wooden door. One believed he had already found the woman who saved his life. The other didn't even know. She was the reason his heart suddenly felt at peace. And somewhere in the darkness, Daniel made a silent promise to himself. If fate refused to stay buried, he would bury it himself. The following week, Black Estate felt strangely alive. For reasons no one could explain. Laughter had returned. The staff noticed it first. Mr. Black, the man who rarely smiled, Now thanked the gardeners, complimented the chef, even paused to ask the security guards about their families. Mrs. Brooks smiled to herself. It feels like the old house is breathing again. Everyone believed Victoria was the reason. Everyone, except Mrs. Brooks. She had been watching carefully. Every time Ethan laughed, Victoria was speaking. But every time Ethan smiled, Claire was somewhere nearby. It was subtle, almost impossible to notice, unless you were looking for it. One rainy afternoon, Claire carried fresh coffee into Ethan's study. He was buried beneath contracts and financial reports. Without saying a word, she quietly placed the tray beside him. Just as she turned to leave, a strong gust of wind blew through the open window. Dozens of important documents scattered across the room. Claire immediately dropped to her knees, helping gather every page before they could disappear. "I'm so sorry, sir." Ethan looked up. "It wasn't your fault." She smiled. "It doesn't have to be my fault. For me to help." For a brief moment, their hands reached for the same document. Their fingers touched. Neither spoke. Neither moved. It lasted only a second. Yet something inside Ethan shifted again. That strange feeling. The same warmth. The same peace. As if life itself kept trying to remind him of something he had forgotten. Claire quickly pulled her hand away. "I'm sorry." Ethan shook his head. "You apologize too much." She laughed softly. "My mother used to say, kind people apologize even when life hurts them." Those words stayed with Ethan long after she left the room. That evening, Victoria arrived unexpectedly. She found Ethan standing by the library window, looking at the garden. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan smiled absent-mindedly. "The new maid." Victoria froze. "The maid? I don't know why." He admitted. "She reminds me of someone." For one terrifying second, Victoria felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. "Who?" Ethan stared into the rain. "I can't explain it. It's just a feeling. Nothing more. Nothing less." Victoria forced herself to smile. "You've always been sentimental." Ethan chuckled. "I suppose I have." But while Ethan looked out the window, Victoria looked toward the hallway. Claire was watering flowers, humming softly to herself, completely unaware that someone was watching her. Victoria's smile slowly faded. Something cold entered her eyes. Not hatred. Not yet. Fear. Fear that another woman could take away the future she had worked so hard to steal. Later that night, Daniel arrived. Victoria pulled him aside before anyone could notice. "We have a problem." Daniel frowned. "What happened?" "He's noticing her." Daniel laughed. "A maid. You said he believed me." "He does." "Then why does he keep looking at her?" Daniel's smile disappeared. He glanced through the hallway. Claire was helping one of the elderly cooks carry a heavy box. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She simply couldn't walk past someone who needed help. Daniel watched silently, then muttered, "Kindness." Victoria looked confused. "What?" "That's the problem. You can fake memories. You can fake tears. You can even fake love. But you can't fake." He paused. A good heart. Silence filled the corridor. For the first time, neither of them felt in control anymore. Then Daniel's face hardened. "If kindness is bringing them together, He whispered, "We'll make sure she's never seen as kind again." Victoria slowly nodded. "What do you want me to do?" Daniel looked toward Claire. His voice became almost emotionless. "Destroy her reputation. One lie at a time." Across the mansion, Claire looked up at the night sky through her bedroom window. She smiled. For the first time in years, life finally felt like it was getting better. She had no idea that downstairs, two people had just agreed to make her life a living nightmare. And somewhere inside the mansion, the wooden memory box remained locked, quietly guarding the truth, waiting for the day when one small mark, one forgotten memory, and one terrible lie would collide. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe and let me know in the comments. If someone stole the credit for saving your life, would you fight to expose the truth or walk away and let the lie win? Because from this moment on, every lie is about to have a price. The next morning, the mansion was unusually quiet. Even the birds outside seemed reluctant to sing. Claire had barely begun her morning duties when Mrs. Brooks approached her. "Mr. Black wants his study cleaned before noon." Claire smiled. "I'll take care of it." She had no idea someone else had already been there. Less than an hour earlier, Daniel quietly unlocked Ethan's study. He wasn't there to steal money. He wasn't there to steal jewelry. He walked straight toward the old wooden memory box, the one Ethan had protected for 20 years. Slowly, he opened it. Inside lay the faded newspaper clipping, the handwritten promise, and the only childhood photograph Ethan still kept. Daniel picked up the photograph, looked at it for a long moment. Then, without hesitation, he tore it in half. Then again, and again, until dozens of tiny pieces covered the desk. He scattered them across the room, opened the window, let the wind carry some onto the floor. Finally, he placed a pair of white cleaning gloves beside the desk. Claire's gloves, the ones she had left in the hallway earlier that morning. Daniel smiled. "It has to look believable." Then he walked away. Minutes later, Claire entered the study. She froze. The room looked as though a storm had passed through it. Papers everywhere, books on the floor, the memory box wide open. She rushed inside. "Oh no," she whispered. She immediately knelt down, carefully gathering every torn piece of the old photograph, trying desperately to fit them back together. She didn't even know whose picture it was. She only knew whoever owned it must have loved it. Just then, the study door burst open. Ethan, Victoria, Daniel, Mrs. Brooks, and 2 security guards. They all stopped at the doorway. Claire was kneeling on the floor, holding the torn photograph in her trembling hands. No one spoke. Daniel broke the silence. "I knew something felt wrong." Victoria slowly covered her mouth. "Oh my goodness." Mrs. Brooks looked confused. "Claire, what happened?" Claire stood immediately. "I don't know. I found it like this. I was trying to fix it." Daniel sighed. "Ethan, I didn't want to believe it either. But I warned you about hearing people you don't really know." The words struck like ice. Ethan slowly walked toward the photograph. His hands shook as he picked up one torn piece. It was the face of the 14-year-old boy he used to be. The last photograph taken only hours before he almost drowned. His breathing became heavy. For 20 years, that photograph had reminded him why he owed his life to someone he had never found. Now, it was destroyed. Claire's voice trembled. "I swear, I didn't do this. I would never." Ethan looked into her eyes. Something inside him refused to believe she was lying. But the evidence was everywhere. The torn photograph, the open memory box, her gloves, her fingerprints on every piece she had tried to collect. Logic told him one story. His heart whispered another. Daniel stepped closer. "I think it's time we let her go." The room became unbearably silent. Mrs. Brooks immediately shook her head. "No, I've watched this young woman every day. She isn't capable of this." Victoria crossed her arms. "Sometimes, the sweetest faces hide the darkest intentions." Claire felt tears filling her eyes. Not because she was being accused, but because no matter what she said, no one could prove she was innocent. Ethan closed the memory box with shaking hands, then quietly said, "Everyone leave." No one argued. One by one, they walked out. Claire remained standing alone, unable to move. Just before Ethan reached the door, he stopped, without turning around. He spoke softly. "I don't know what happened here, but until I know the truth, no one is dismissing Claire." Daniel's face changed. Only for a second. That wasn't the outcome he wanted. Claire looked up, confused. Ethan still hadn't chosen to trust her. But he hadn't chosen to abandon her either. As everyone left the study, Daniel glanced back one last time. His jaw tightened. The first trap had failed. Not completely, but enough to make him realize something terrifying. Winning Ethan's mind would be much easier than defeating his heart. The accusation in the study changed everything. Even though Ethan had refused to fire Claire, the warmth inside the mansion disappeared. Some of the staff began whispering. Others avoided her completely. For the first time since arriving at Black Estate, Claire felt alone. That evening she skipped dinner. Instead, she sat alone in the small garden behind the staff quarters. The same garden she had quietly cared for every morning. She looked up at the stars, trying not to cry. She had spent her entire life being misunderstood. But somehow, this hurt more. Because for the first time in years, she had felt like she belonged somewhere. A few minutes later, Mrs. Brooks found her sitting there. "I thought I'd find you here." Claire quickly wiped her eyes. "I'm sorry, I should be working." Mrs. Brooks sat beside her. "No. Tonight you should breathe." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Mrs. Brooks asked softly, "Did you really do it?" Claire's eyes filled with tears again. She shook her head. "I didn't. I don't even know why anyone would think I could." Mrs. Brooks smiled gently. "I know." That answer surprised her. "You believe me?" "With all my heart." Claire could no longer hold back her tears. She broke down. For several minutes, she cried like a little girl. The kind of cry that comes from years of carrying too much pain alone. Mrs. Brooks simply held her hand. No questions. No judgment. Just kindness. Meanwhile, inside the mansion, Ethan couldn't sleep. The torn photograph lay on his desk. He had carefully pieced it back together. But something still bothered him. Not the photograph. Claire. He remembered the look in her eyes. She hadn't looked angry or guilty. She had looked heartbroken, as if being accused had wounded her deeply. He sighed and walked toward the window. Then he heard it. A melody. Soft, gentle. Someone was singing. He followed the sound. Down the hallway. Through the back doors. Into the garden. He stopped. Claire was sitting beneath a tree, quietly humming to herself. The same melody her mother used to sing whenever life became difficult. A melody she had sung since childhood. A melody she didn't even realize she remembered. The moment Ethan heard it, his entire body froze. No, that couldn't be. He knew that song 20 years ago, as he lay wrapped in a blanket after nearly drowning. He remembered hearing a little girl humming the same tune while sitting beside the pool. At the time, he had asked his mother about it. She never knew the song. No one did. Yet here it was. The exact same melody. His heartbeat became louder. Claire looked up and was startled to see him. She immediately stood. "Sir, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to disturb anyone." Ethan didn't answer. He was staring at her, almost as if he were seeing her for the very first time. "Where did you learn that song?" Claire looked confused. "What song?" "The one you were just singing." She thought for a moment. "Oh, my mother used to sing it. I've known it all my life." Ethan's pulse quickened. "Did you grow up in this city?" "Yes." "Were you ever neighbors with the Black family?" Claire frowned. "The Black family?" She slowly shook her head. "I don't think so. I moved around a lot after my parents died." The answer disappointed him. Maybe it was all a coincidence. Maybe he was chasing ghosts again. Claire smiled awkwardly. "I have a terrible memory for things from my childhood. I barely remember what happened last year." She laughed softly. But Ethan didn't laugh. Because for the first time, he wasn't thinking about the birthmark, or the accident, or the photograph. He was thinking about the feeling. The same feeling he had every time she smiled. Every time she laughed. Every time she walked into a room. A strange sense of peace. As though his soul knew something his mind had not yet discovered. At that exact moment, someone else was watching from an upstairs window. Victoria. She had arrived earlier and couldn't sleep. She had seen everything. The garden. The conversation. The way Ethan looked at Claire. And for the first time, she felt something terrifying. Not jealousy. Panic. Because she suddenly realized something. Ethan wasn't falling in love with the woman who had supposedly saved his life. He was slowly being drawn to the woman who actually had. Victoria stepped away from the window, her hands trembling. A few moments later, she picked up her phone. Daniel answered immediately. "What's wrong?" Her voice shook. "We're running out of time." Silence. Then Daniel asked quietly, "What happened?" Victoria looked out the window once more. Ethan and Claire were still standing in the garden, talking, smiling. She swallowed hard. "I don't know who she is, but if we don't get rid of that maid, we're going to lose everything." The next morning, a heavy silence hung over Black Estate. Claire barely slept. Victoria barely blinked. And Ethan couldn't stop thinking about a song. For the first time in 20 years, the memories in his heart were beginning to feel real again. Meanwhile, upstairs in the guest suite, Victoria paced nervously. "What if she remembers?" she asked. Daniel remained calm. She doesn't. What if Ethan starts asking questions? He won't. But he already is. Daniel's expression hardened. Then we make sure he stops. Victoria looked at him. And how do we do that? Daniel smiled coldly. By giving him a reason to trust you even more. Later that afternoon, Mrs. Brooks asked Claire to bring fresh flowers to the West Garden. The estate was preparing for a charity dinner that evening. Claire happily agreed. She loved flowers. They reminded her of her mother. As she knelt in the garden, trimming the roses, a thorn pierced her finger. Ouch! A tiny drop of blood appeared. At that exact moment, Ethan happened to be walking by. Without thinking, he hurried over. You're hurt. Claire looked up surprised. It's nothing, sir. But Ethan had already taken out his handkerchief. Give me your hand. She hesitated, then slowly did. He gently wrapped the small cut. His movements were careful, almost protective. Claire couldn't help smiling. You really don't have to do this. Ethan looked at her. I know. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world seemed strangely quiet. Then, Mrs. Brooks' voice echoed from inside the mansion. Claire, the ladder is here. Claire stood quickly. I have to decorate the balcony. She picked up the flower basket and hurried away. Ethan watched her go. That same feeling returned. Warm, familiar, dangerously comforting. An hour later, the charity guests had begun arriving. The mansion buzzed with activity. Claire stood on a small ladder, hanging flowers along the second-floor balcony. Below, Victoria noticed Ethan watching her. Again, her jaw tightened. Then, an idea entered her mind. A terrible idea. She quietly walked toward the staircase. No one noticed. No one except Daniel. He saw the look in her eyes and immediately followed. On the balcony, Claire reached higher to place the last arrangement. Suddenly, a hand grabbed the ladder, then pushed. Hard. Everything happened in seconds. The ladder slipped. Claire screamed. Her body fell backward. The flower basket crashed to the ground. Guests gasped. Mrs. Brooks shouted. Ethan looked up, and his blood turned cold. Without thinking, he ran. Claire hit the marble floor. A sharp cry escaped her lips. The impact tore part of her uniform near her thigh. For a brief second, time stopped. The fabric had ripped. And there, high on her left thigh, was a small crescent-shaped birthmark. The exact same mark. The exact same shape. The exact same place. Ethan froze. His breathing stopped. The sounds around him disappeared. The guests, the music, the voices, everything faded away. All he could see was a frightened little girl standing beside a swimming pool 20 years ago. A torn dress, a gentle smile, and that mark, that same mark. The world spun around him. No, he whispered. No. Claire winced in pain, trying to sit up. She had no idea what he was looking at. She quickly pulled the torn fabric together. Embarrassed, just like she had done 20 years earlier. And that destroyed the last of Ethan's doubts. Because he remembered that too. The way she had tried to cover the mark. The way she had lowered her eyes. Exactly the same. Exactly the same. His eyes filled with tears. The impossible had just become real. The woman he had searched for half his life. The woman he believed he had already found. Had been standing in front of him all along. Serving his meals. Cleaning his office. Being accused in his own home. And suffering while another woman stole her place. Claire looked up. "Sir?" Her voice sounded distant. Ethan couldn't answer. He couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. Because one horrifying thought had just entered his mind. If Claire was the girl, then who was Victoria? Slowly, very slowly, he lifted his eyes. Across the courtyard, Victoria stood frozen. Her face had turned pale. And beside her, Daniel looked as though he had just seen a ghost. In that terrible moment, no one said a word. But 3 people understood the same thing. The lie had just begun to die. For several seconds, no one moved. No one breathed. The entire courtyard seemed frozen in time. Claire was still sitting on the marble floor, trying to gather the scattered flowers. Completely unaware that her entire life had just changed. Ethan couldn't take his eyes off her. The birthmark. The same shy reaction. The same gentle face. After 20 years, he had finally found her. And she had been under his roof all along. A painful memory suddenly crashed into him. The torn photograph. The accusations. The lonely look in her eyes. He had let her suffer. He had let her cry. He had almost sent her away. His chest tightened with guilt. Claire. Her name barely escaped his lips. She looked up. "Sir, I'm okay." Even now. Even while hurt. She was trying to reassure him. That broke something inside him. He quickly knelt beside her. "Are you injured?" She smiled weakly. "I think I twisted my ankle." Ethan gently helped her sit up. Their eyes met. And for the first time, he looked at her not as an employee, not as a stranger, but as the girl who had saved his life. Twice, at that exact moment, Victoria turned and walked away. Fast, too fast. Daniel immediately followed her. Inside the guest suite, Victoria slammed the door shut. Her hands trembled. "No, no, no." Daniel closed the curtains. "Calm down. Calm down," she shouted. "He saw the mark. He knows." Daniel's face had turned pale. For the first time since beginning his plan, he had no answer. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "What do we do now?" Silence. Then, a terrible thought entered Daniel's mind. His voice became frighteningly calm. "If she disappears?" Victoria stared at him. "What if she disappears? There is no proof." She took a step back. "You can't mean that." Daniel looked at her. "Everything is falling apart. We'll lose everything. I'll lose everything." Victoria shook her head. "No." But deep down, she knew he was right. Daniel moved closer. "He has no documents. No name. No photographs. Nothing. All he has." He paused. "Is her." The room fell silent. Rain began tapping softly against the windows. Victoria looked outside. Claire was being helped toward the mansion by Mrs. Brooks. She looked so harmless, so kind, so undeserving of what was being planned. A tear slid down Victoria's face. "I never wanted this." Daniel's expression hardened. "You wanted the money. You wanted the life. Now fight for it." That evening, A storm rolled over the city. Heavy rain, strong winds. Most of the staff had gone to their quarters. Mrs. Brooks insisted that Claire rest her ankle. But Claire hated being idle. She quietly went downstairs to make herself tea. As she returned to her room, the lights suddenly went out. Darkness swallowed the hallway. A fuse had blown. Claire sighed softly. Then she heard it. Footsteps. Behind her. Slow. Deliberate. She turned. No one. Another step. Closer. Her heart began to race. Hello. No answer. Then, a hand suddenly grabbed her from behind. Claire screamed. The figure shoved her toward the staircase. She lost her balance. Her injured ankle gave way, and she tumbled down the first few steps. Before she could recover, the figure descended after her. Vast, determined. A flash of lightning illuminated the hallway. For one terrifying second, Claire saw the person's face. Victoria. Her eyes widened. Why you? Victoria froze. She hadn't planned for Claire to recognize her. Neither woman moved. Rain thundered outside. Claire's voice trembled. Why? Victoria's hands shook. She couldn't answer, because she didn't know anymore. Was she trying to protect her lie? Or had she become someone she no longer recognized? At that exact moment, a voice thundered through the darkness. Claire. Ethan. He had been looking for her ever since the accident in the courtyard. The lights suddenly flickered back on. Victoria stepped away in panic. Claire looked up, tears streaming down her face. Ethan reached the staircase and stopped. Claire was sitting on the floor, terrified, shaking, and Victoria was standing right above her. The scene spoke for itself. Victoria. His voice was low, dangerously low. What happened here? No one answered. Claire looked at Victoria. Victoria looked at the floor. Then, for the first time since they met, Ethan looked at the woman he believed had saved him, and felt absolutely nothing. No warmth, no peace, no familiarity, only suspicion and fear, because deep in his heart, he already knew the woman standing before him was not the one he had spent 20 years searching for, and the woman trembling on the stairs was. The storm lasted all night, but inside Black Estate, a different storm had already begun. After helping Claire to her room, Ethan didn't say much. He simply called the family doctor and stayed outside her door until the examination was over. A minor sprain, a few bruises, nothing broken. Yet Ethan looked as though he had been the one who had fallen. As the doctor left, Claire opened the door. She was surprised to find him still there. You should get some rest, sir. He looked up at her. There were 1,000 questions in his eyes, but only one came out. Are you afraid of me? Claire blinked. What? After everything that's happened in this house, are you afraid of me? She smiled softly. No. Why not? Because honestly, she probably should have been. She had been accused, humiliated, almost pushed down a staircase. And still, she looked at him with kindness. Claire thought for a moment, then said quietly, My mother used to tell me something. Some people hurt you because they're lost, and some people fail you because they're hurting too. She smiled. I don't think you're a bad person, Mr. Black. Those words pierced his heart. because she had every reason to hate him. And yet, she chose understanding. For several seconds, he couldn't speak. Finally, he whispered, "Thank you." She nodded and closed the door, leaving him alone in the hallway. And for the first time in years, Ethan cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just silent tears. Because he finally understood something. The girl who saved him at 14 had grown into a woman whose heart was even more beautiful than he had imagined. An hour later, he walked into his study. The old wooden memory box sat on his desk, waiting. Slowly, he opened it. Inside were all the pieces of his past. The newspaper clipping, the handwritten promise, the repaired photograph, and beneath everything else, a small blue ribbon. He froze. He hadn't looked at it in years. The ribbon had belonged to the little girl. She had dropped it beside the pool after saving him. He had kept it ever since. He picked it up carefully. Then something strange happened. A memory returned. Not of the girl, of Daniel. Years ago, shortly after college, Daniel had once seen the ribbon and asked him about it. Ethan remembered telling him everything. The drowning, the birthmark, the promise, everything. His eyes widened. Then another memory came. A few months ago, the night Daniel had first suggested taking a break from searching. The strange questions, the sudden appearance of Victoria, the way Daniel always seemed too interested in the story. A terrible realization slowly formed. No, he whispered. No. His breathing became heavy. He grabbed his phone and called his head of security. Get me every security recording from the past 2 weeks, especially the study, and don't tell anyone. An hour later, the footage arrived. Ethan watched in silence. The first recording showed Claire entering the study. Then, another clip. Earlier that morning, the study door opened. A man walked inside. Ethan leaned forward. The image was blurry. The figure turned, and the world stopped. Daniel. He watched as his best friend opened the memory box. Watched him scatter the torn photograph. Watched him place Claire's gloves on the floor. Watched him frame her. The room became unbearably quiet. Ethan couldn't breathe. 20 years of friendship. Gone. Every laugh. Every memory. Every moment of trust. All of it shattered in an instant. He replayed the footage. Again. And again. Hoping he was wrong. He was. A tear slid down his face. Not because of the money. Not because of Victoria. But because betrayal hurts most. When it comes from the person you would have trusted with your life. Then, his phone rang. It was Daniel. The irony almost made him laugh. He answered. Ethan. Daniel's cheerful voice filled the room. I was thinking we should all have breakfast tomorrow. Silence. Ethan. He finally spoke. Why? What? Why did you do it? The line went silent. For the first time, Daniel didn't have an answer. Then, the call disconnected. Ethan slowly lowered the phone. The truth was finally complete. The woman he had searched for was under his roof. The woman he planned to reward was a fraud. And the man he called a brother had sold him for money. He looked down at the blue ribbon in his hand, then toward the hallway, toward Claire's room. A woman who had saved him twice and asked for nothing. A woman who had been hurt because of his mistakes. A woman who still didn't remember him. He closed his eyes and made a promise. This time, he would save her, just as she had saved him. Twice. The sun had not yet risen. Black Estate was still asleep. But one room remained lit. Ethan's study. He hadn't slept. Not for a single minute. The blue ribbon lay on his desk. Beside it, the old newspaper clipping, the repaired photograph, and 20 years of memories. For the first time, everything finally made sense. The song, the birthmark, the feeling of peace whenever Claire was near. It had always been her. Always. Meanwhile, Claire sat by her bedroom window. Her ankle still hurt, but something else troubled her. She couldn't stop thinking about Ethan's face on the staircase. The way he had looked at her, as though he knew her, as though he had lost something precious, and suddenly found it again. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. She opened the door. It was Ethan. Neither of them spoke. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Then Ethan asked softly, "Will you come with me?" She nodded. A few minutes later, they stood beside the old swimming pool behind the mansion. It had not been used in years. Leaves floated on the water. The tiles had faded, but Ethan had never allowed it to be destroyed. Claire looked around. A strange feeling settled over her. "Why are we here?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his pocket and took out the blue ribbon. The moment Claire saw it, her eyes widened. She took an unconscious step forward. "I know this ribbon." Her voice was barely a whisper. Ethan's heart raced. "You do?" She frowned. I don't know. It feels familiar." Slowly, he handed it to her. The instant her fingers touched the ribbon, something happened. A memory, then another, and another. A little girl running through a garden. A beautiful mansion. Laughter. A birthday party. Then, screams. Water. A boy sinking beneath the surface. A frightened little girl diving into the pool. Claire's hand began to tremble. "No." She took another step back. Her breathing became uneven. "No." Tears filled her eyes. Ethan moved toward her. "Claire." She looked at him, but she wasn't seeing the man standing before her. She was seeing the 14-year-old boy. Cold, unconscious, lying beside the pool. "You." Her voice broke. "You were the little boy." The words shattered what little control Ethan had left. Tears immediately filled his eyes. He nodded. "Yes." Claire covered her mouth. Oh my God. The memories kept coming. The security guard. The ripped dress. The envelope of money. The smile before she left. Everything. She remembered. Every single thing. She began to cry. Not because she had found a wealthy man. Not because of fate. But because she had just found a piece of herself she thought had been lost forever. "You remembered me," she whispered. Ethan laughed through his tears. "I never forgot you." That sentence broke her completely. She cried openly now. And for the first time in 20 years. So did he. Two people, standing beside the same pool, finally finding each other again. After all the years. After all the pain. After all the missed chances, Claire looked at him. You've been searching for me. For 20 years. Her eyes widened. Why? He smiled sadly. Because I owed you my life. She shook her head. You didn't owe me anything. He took a step closer. You saved me. Twice. She looked confused. Twice. Then he told her. The car accident. The ambulance. The birthmark. Everything. By the time he finished, neither of them had dry eyes. Claire smiled through her tears. I can't believe this. Neither can I. Silence settled between them. A beautiful silence. The kind that only comes after years of waiting. Then Ethan's expression changed. Guilt. Pain. Regret. I'm sorry. She looked up. For what? For everything. For accusing you. For letting you suffer. For believing someone else. He could barely continue. I hurt the person who spent her whole life saving me. Claire stared at him. Then, she did something unexpected. She smiled. A gentle, almost unforgettable smile. The same smile she had given him 20 years ago. You didn't know. Those 3 words destroyed him. Because even now, even after everything, she was trying to comfort him. At that moment, he realized something. He had spent 20 years searching for the girl who saved his life. But standing before him was a woman who could save his heart. Without thinking, he reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. The morning sun slowly rose behind them. Its light reflected across the water. And for the first time, the truth stood completely uncovered. No more lies. No more secrets. No more searching. Just 2 people who had finally found their way back to each other. But inside the mansion, 2 other people had just received a message. A message from security. Mr. Black would like to see you immediately. Daniel looked at Victoria. Victoria looked at Daniel. And for reasons they couldn't explain, they were suddenly afraid. Because deep down, they already knew. The truth had finally reached the surface. The grand clock in the entrance hall struck 9. Every member of the household had been asked to gather in the main living room. No one knew why. The atmosphere was tense. Mrs. Brooks stood quietly beside the fireplace. The staff whispered among themselves. Victoria sat on the edge of the sofa, her hands trembling. Daniel tried to appear calm, but inside, he was terrified. A few moments later, the doors opened. Ethan walked in. Beside him was Claire. For the first time since arriving at Black Estate, she was not wearing her maid's uniform. Mrs. Brooks had insisted she change into one of her late daughter's dresses. Simple, elegant, beautiful. The entire room looked at her differently. But Ethan never took his eyes off her. The silence was deafening. Then he spoke. I called everyone here because there is something I need to correct. No one moved. No one breathed. He looked at Victoria, then at Daniel. For 20 years, I searched for the person who saved my life. Victoria lowered her eyes. And I believed, he continued, that I had finally found her. Daniel swallowed hard. Ethan's voice became colder. But I was wrong. The room fell silent. Victoria's face turned pale. Then, Ethan reached into his pocket and placed a blue ribbon on the table. Claire's eyes softened. Mrs. Brooks looked confused. Daniel's hands began to shake. This ribbon belonged to the little girl who saved me from drowning when I was 14. He turned toward Claire. And this morning, I found her. The room erupted. The staff gasped. Mrs. Brooks covered her mouth. Tears filled her eyes. Claire looked down, overwhelmed. "No," Victoria whispered. "No." Ethan slowly turned back to her. "You lied to me." She immediately burst into tears. "I was going to tell you the truth." "When?" he asked quietly. "After the money was transferred." Her face crumbled. She couldn't answer. Then Ethan looked at Daniel, the man he had once called a brother. "And you?" His voice broke. "Why?" Daniel remained silent. For several seconds, no one spoke. Finally, he laughed. A sad, defeated laugh. "You really want to know?" Ethan nodded. Daniel looked around the room, then back at his friend. "Because I was tired. Tired of standing beside you while you had everything." The room became still. "You were born into wealth. You were admired. You were respected. And everywhere we went, I was always." He paused. Ethan Black's friend. A tear slid down his face. "For once, I wanted to be the man with everything." Silence. Painful silence. Then he looked at Claire. "And when I read your promise, half of everything I own would never be enough." He smiled bitterly. "I saw my chance." Ethan's eyes filled with tears. 20 years of friendship, reduced to greed. "You could have asked me for anything." Daniel laughed again. "You don't understand. I didn't want your money. I wanted your life." Those words broke something inside Ethan. Because there was no argument against them. Only heartbreak. Victoria suddenly fell to her knees. "I'm sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen." She looked at Claire. "I'm sorry." Tears streamed down her face. "I was jealous. I wanted the kind of love you didn't even know you had." Claire looked at her. And for the first time, she saw not a villain, but a woman who had destroyed herself chasing someone else's destiny. Then Ethan did something no one expected. He walked to the table, picked up a folder, and held it in the air. "This is the wealth transfer agreement." The same document that would have given Victoria almost half of his fortune. The document that had nearly changed everything. Slowly, he tore it in half. Then again, and again. Tiny pieces of paper drifted onto the floor, just like the photograph that had once been destroyed. Only this time, the right thing was being saved. He looked at Claire, then at everyone in the room. "I almost gave everything to the wrong woman." His voice trembled. "But the woman who truly deserved my gratitude never asked me for anything." Tears filled Claire's eyes. Because it was true. She had never wanted money. Never wanted recognition. Never wanted reward. She had simply saved a life. Twice, security quietly stepped forward. Daniel didn't resist. Neither did Victoria. As they reached the door, Daniel stopped. He looked back one final time. At Ethan. At Claire. At the life he had tried to steal. Then lowered his head and walked away. The front doors closed behind them. Silence returned. No one moved. Then, Mrs. Brooks began to clap. A single clap. Then another. Soon, every member of the household joined in. Not for wealth, not for power, but for truth, for kindness, for destiny. Claire looked around the room in disbelief. Then her eyes found Ethan. He smiled, the same grateful smile he should have given her 20 years ago. And for the first time, she smiled back, without tears, without pain, without secrets. The lie was over. The truth had finally come home. 6 months later, Black Estate looked different. Lighter, warmer, alive. The laughter had returned. The flowers in the garden had bloomed. Even the old swimming pool, the place where everything had begun, had finally been restored. But today, it wasn't decorated for a party or a business event. It was decorated for a wedding. White roses lined the pathway. Hundreds of tiny lights reflected on the water. Family, friends, and every member of the household had gathered. Mrs. Brooks could barely stop crying. "This old heart can't take any more happiness," she said, wiping her tears. Everyone laughed. At the end of the garden, Ethan stood waiting. He looked nervous, more nervous than he had been during any business deal in his life. In his hand, he held something precious, a small blue ribbon, the same ribbon he had protected for 20 years. Then, the music began. Everyone turned. Claire appeared. For a moment, the entire garden seemed to stop breathing. She looked beautiful, but it wasn't the dress, or the flowers, or the lights. It was her smile. The same gentle smile she had worn as a 12-year-old girl standing beside a swimming pool. The same smile that had lived in Ethan's memory for 20 years. As she walked toward him, Ethan's eyes filled with tears, and so did hers. When she finally reached him, neither of them spoke. They simply looked at each other. 2 people, 2 lives, 20 years of waiting, and 1 impossible journey. The officiant smiled. "I've performed many weddings, but I don't believe I've ever seen 2 people who found each other quite like this." Everyone laughed softly. Then he turned to Ethan. "Do you have vows?" Ethan nodded. He unfolded a piece of paper, then smiled. "No, I don't think I need it." He looked directly at Claire. "When I was 14 years old, I thought I was drowning. But I wasn't just drowning in a pool. I was drowning in fear. And a little girl jumped in and saved me." He paused, his voice trembling. 20 years later, I was drowning again. In loneliness. In gratitude I could never repay. In a life that had everything except the person I wanted to thank. And somehow, you saved me again. Tears rolled down Claire's cheeks. Ethan smiled through his own. "I spent 20 years looking for the girl who saved my life. But I found something even more beautiful." He gently held her hands. "I found a woman who taught me that kindness asks for nothing in return. A woman who forgives even when she has every reason not to. A woman whose heart is worth more than all the wealth I almost gave away." The guests wiped away tears. Even the staff were openly crying. Then Ethan reached into his pocket and took out the blue ribbon. Claire's hand flew to her mouth. He tied it gently around her wrist. "I've kept this for 20 years. I think it's finally time I gave it back." Claire broke down in tears. Because in that moment, she realized something. He hadn't just remembered her. He had carried a piece of her for half his life. The officiant looked at her. "And you, Claire?" She laughed softly through her tears. I had a speech prepared. Everyone smiled. But now I can't remember any of it. The guests laughed. She looked at Ethan. And suddenly, her eyes filled with tears again. You spent 20 years trying to thank me. But the truth is, you never owed me anything. She took a deep breath. I saved a boy because I couldn't leave him behind. I saved a stranger because I couldn't walk away. And somewhere along the journey, that boy and that stranger became the man I love. There wasn't a dry eye in the garden. Then she smiled. That unforgettable smile. So if anyone should be grateful, it's me. Because after all these years, I finally found the little boy from the pool. Silence. Beautiful silence. Then, the officiant smiled. I think I've kept destiny waiting long enough. The guests laughed through their tears. I now pronounce you husband and wife. Ethan didn't wait another second. He kissed her. The garden erupted in applause. Mrs. Brooks cried even harder. The staff cheered. Fireworks suddenly lit up the night sky. And for the first time in 20 years, everything felt complete. Later that evening, as the celebration continued, Ethan quietly led Claire away from the guests. They stopped beside the swimming pool, the same place where fate had introduced them. The water reflected the stars. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Claire smiled. Funny, isn't it? What is? If I hadn't jumped into this pool. She laughed softly. None of this would have happened. Ethan looked at her. No. He gently held her hand. If you hadn't jumped into that pool, I wouldn't be here. She smiled, then rested her head on his shoulder. Together, they looked at the water, at the place where a frightened little girl had made a brave choice. A choice that changed two lives forever. Ethan kissed her forehead and whispered the words he had waited 20 years to say. Thank you for saving me. Claire looked up at him, then smiled. Twice. He laughed. No, he said softly. You've been saving me all along. The lights from the wedding shimmered across the water. The stars glowed above them. And somewhere, perhaps in heaven, two proud parents were smiling. Because the little girl who once came from nothing, and the little boy who almost lost everything, had finally found their way back to each other. Not because of money, not because of fate alone, but because true kindness always finds its way home. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and comment. Kindness always wins. Your support helps us bring more emotional stories like this to life. See you in the next video.